The screen in the briefing room glowed with a wildfire map stretched across the mountains of northern Arizona. Sarah Carter sat in the back, her notepad open, eyes fixed on the digital display. Something was wrong. The map was flipped. She hesitated for a second, then raised her hand and spoke, her voice even and quiet. The sector numbers were reversed, she said. If they followed that map, they'd be flying directly into an active firestorm. Laughter rippled across the room. Colonel Reed didn't even look at her. He motioned toward the screen and said, "Logistics should leave flying to the people with wings on their chest." A few officers smirked. Lieutenant Miller turned to her and said, maybe she should focus on supply manifests, not wildfire vectors. Sarah lowered her hand without another word. Her face gave nothing away, but her fingers tightened around her pen. An hour later, the radio crackled with shouts, pilots yelling over each other, fire clouds, heat vortices, shifting winds. One voice screamed something about losing altitude, then cut out completely. No one in the command room moved. The map still showed aircraft flying toward Sector 9. The real Sector 9. The one covered in flames. Sarah stood, walked toward the main terminal, and leaned over the comm. Her voice was calm. "Redirect all aircraft. Turn left. Follow the line through Sector 9 West exit. Trust it." For a few seconds, no one responded. Then one pilot called back. Another followed. The panic began to fade as aircraft veered out of danger, skimming low over safe zones. Everyone in the room turned slowly towards Sarah. No one spoke. Colonel Reed cleared his throat but didn't finish the sentence. Someone muttered under their breath, "Who just gave that command?" Sarah stepped back without answering. She returned to her desk at the edge of the room, her head bowed. On the screen, the fire kept moving. So did the aircraft. But now they were flying where they were supposed to, because one clerk had seen what no one else had. And they were starting to wonder who she really was. Part 1. A simple woman with a secret past. Every morning, Sarah Carter arrived at Davis Air Force Base 30 minutes before the rest of the logistics team. The office lights were still flickering to life when she walked in, coffee in one hand, a worn binder in the other. Her uniform was always crisp, her hair pulled back in the same clean bun, and her steps quiet across the linoleum. She spoke little unless asked. Most of her conversations ended with a soft nod or a polite, "Yes, ma'am." She ate lunch in the far corner of the cafeteria, the one with a view of the runway, but far enough away from the clusters of chatter and laughter. At 35, Sarah had become a fixture in the base's supply chain. She moved through the system with quiet efficiency, processing orders, coordinating deliveries, double-checking serials. People described her as reliable, steady. Some didn't remember her name, but always remembered how fast she handled paperwork. No one ever asked much more. Her apartment 5 miles from base was as unremarkable as her desk. One bedroom, beige walls, a second-hand couch she didn't use. The fridge held only what she needed, and the closet had 2 sets of uniforms folded with precision. Her personal life was invisible, and that seemed to suit her. But every night when the base quieted and the last light faded from the flight line, Sarah opened the drawer beside her bed. Inside was a small wooden box with scuffed corners smooth from years of handling. She lifted the lid like it held something fragile. It always started the same. Her fingers brushed across a faded photo. 4 pilots in front of an A-10, all grinning under the Afghan sun. Then came a tarnished silver pin worn at the edges, the wings dulled but not forgotten. At the bottom, folded carefully, was a letter she had never finished. She didn't read it. She didn't need to. She knew every line by heart. She touched the corner of the page, held it there for a second, then closed the box and slid it back into the drawer. Her hand lingered on the surface a moment longer before she turned off the light and stared up at the ceiling. At the hangar, Technical Sergeant Miguel Rodriguez watched everything. He'd been with the Air Force longer than most of the pilots had been alive. He knew engines, metal fatigue, weather systems, and he knew people. He'd noticed the way Sarah stood too close to the flight line at dusk, her eyes tracking the warthogs as they descended. He'd seen her fingers twitch like they were remembering something her body hadn't forgotten. One afternoon, he caught her standing alone beside an A-10, her hand resting flat on the titanium frame. She didn't say anything when he approached, just turned slightly, her eyes distant, locked on something far beyond the walls of the base. "You flew one of these, didn't you?" he said. She didn't answer right away, then quietly said, A long time ago. She walked off before he could say anything more. Rodriguez didn't push it, but that night he stayed a little later than usual, checking the maintenance logs for birds older than the crew that flew them. And when he saw one old file, one call sign scratched out, he sat back in his chair and whispered a name the base hadn't spoken in years. Ghost. He didn't tell anyone. Not yet. But from that day on, whenever Sarah passed through the hangar, he gave a nod with just a little more weight behind it. She always nodded back as if they were sharing a quiet truth. Neither one of them was ready to say aloud. Sarah kept showing up at 5:30, kept eating alone, kept opening the drawer each night and touching the past like it was something too hot to hold for long, and the rest of the base kept on moving, unaware that the quietest person in logistics used to own the sky. Part 2. A Ghost from the Sky. Part 2.1. A Name She Can't Forget. The mountains of the Korengal Valley closed in fast, steep ridges of stone and shadow as Sarah Carter banked her A-10 low. Her call sign echoed in her ears. Ghost. She'd earned it flying under radar, threading her aircraft through terrain that barely left room for error. That day, the air was thick with heat and dust, but the radio crackled clear with a message she couldn't ignore. 15 soldiers trapped, pinned down by enemy fire. Ammo low, wounded piling up. Major David Chen's voice came through next. Calm, but urgent. He was flying lead. He was also her mentor, her anchor. Intel flagged possible surface-to-air missiles, and he suggested they reassess. But Sarah saw the layout. Every second counted. She pushed forward, locking her path toward the canyon. She dropped below 300 feet right above the treetops. Her hands worked by instinct. The GAU-8 cannon roared to life, 30-millimeter rounds punching through enemy lines with surgical bursts. On the second run, she blew out the heavy weapons, clearing a path. Then came the third pass. Her display lit up in red. Incoming. Missile lock. The alarm screamed. Chen's voice snapped through the calm. Evasive maneuvers now. Sarah pulled hard, right flares ejecting in a burst of smoke. The first missile missed. The second didn't. She heard it before she saw it. A low thud. Then a bloom of black smoke and flame. David's aircraft pitched sideways and spun toward the rocks. She shouted his name, voice cracking over static. He came back faint, slow, like he was already fading. Save them, Ghost. Her heart was a drumbeat of panic, but she steadied. Finished her runs, 11 passes in total, each under fire, each flown with the fury of someone who had nothing left to lose. She didn't flinch, didn't blink, cleared the drop zone, protected the medevac. All 15 made it out alive. Back at base, the hangar was silent when she landed. No one spoke. They saw the soot, the bullet scars on the fuselage, the hollow in her eyes. The investigation lasted months. She was cleared of fault. No error. No technical failure. But the whispers stuck. Some said she hesitated. Others claimed she pushed too far, that she could have saved him. The brass shook her hand in front of cameras, then stopped assigning her missions. Pilots avoided her. Her name became harder to say out loud. She wrote a letter to David's wife that night. Tried to explain that he died doing what he believed in, that she did everything he taught her, that she was sorry. The pen slipped halfway through. The words never felt right. She folded the page and never mailed it. After that, she stopped flying. Ghost disappeared, but the sound of that last radio call never left her. Save them, Ghost. And she did. Just not all of them. Part 2.2. Leaving the Sky Behind. The board cleared her of any wrongdoing. No mistakes in judgment. No technical failure. The flight logs showed precision. Her timing had saved lives. But none of it mattered in the locker rooms, in the sideways glances, in the silence that followed her footsteps down the flight line. They didn't say her name, not out loud. Some called her reckless. Others whispered that she froze. A few swore she could have saved him if she'd flown faster or pulled out sooner or turned back. No one said it to her face. They didn't have to. She heard it in how quickly conversations stopped when she entered a room. Major David Chen was given full honors. His casket draped in flags, his photo framed beside flowers at the chapel. Sarah stood at the back during the service. She didn't wear her flight suit. She didn't sit with the others. When it ended, she left without speaking to his wife. That night she sat at her desk and opened a new sheet of paper. Her hands trembled just slightly. She wrote David's name, then Emily, then a few more words. He died trying to save people. I did what he taught me. I tried to bring them all back, but I couldn't. I'm so sorry. She stopped writing after that. Nothing felt honest. Nothing felt enough. She folded the page, neatly slid it into the wooden box in her drawer, and closed it without sealing the envelope. 2 weeks later, she filed her resignation. The Air Force processed it without much delay. No one asked why. Maybe they already knew. Maybe they didn't care. She packed light, took only what fit in the trunk of a borrowed sedan, and drove west until the bases thinned out and the names on the rosters didn't recognize hers. She applied for a logistics position in Arizona. When asked about flight experience, she left the section blank. They gave her the job. She showed up every day at 5:30, sorted supply routes, counted crates, checked and rechecked inventory. She spoke in soft tones, nodded when addressed, avoided small talk. There were no medals on her walls, no photos, just a quiet apartment with a window that overlooked a small stretch of sky. At night, she watched the A-10s descend past sunset and told herself she'd done her part. She never mentioned the Korangal, never said his name again. But the letter stayed in the drawer, folded, waiting, like a question she still didn't know how to answer. Part 3. Firestorm and Disrespect. Smoke curled on the horizon, thick and rising fast. The wildfire had jumped containment lines overnight and now threatened a team of 500 firefighters pinned deep inside the forest. They were surrounded on 3 sides with wind shifting against them. The call came in just before noon. The base snapped into motion. Colonel Reed called an emergency briefing. Every pilot, planner, and support officer packed into the operations room. The heat in the air wasn't just from the fire. It was urgency, dread pressure to act. 4 A-10s sat ready on the tarmac. That was all they had. One bird was still down with a hydraulics issue, another stripped for inspection. Sarah stood in the back, arms folded around her file eyes, scanning the satellite feed on the wall. The red bands of heat were moving too fast, too wide. She stepped forward, slow and careful. She said it plain. 4 aircraft wouldn't be enough. To hold the eastern fire line, they needed 5 minimum. With current spread rates, anything less would collapse the coverage window. The room paused. Then the first chuckle came. It was Captain Dawson. He leaned back in his chair and smiled without humor. Miller followed, muttering something about clerks playing commander. Colonel Reed didn't smile. He laughed once, short and sharp, then turned toward her with arms crossed. "And where exactly did you get your tactical credentials, Carter?" Sarah stood straight. She said the math was simple. Coverage grids, dispersal rates, wind velocity. The fire was moving at 15 miles an hour. Gusts would double that across the ridge. The line would be breached in 2 hours. Dawson shook his head. "Lady, this isn't a spreadsheet problem. These are real lives, real jets. You don't get to run this like a parts order." Miller added, she should stick to what she knew. That was assuming she actually knew anything beyond packing crates. The room laughed, not all of them, but enough to make her feel like she was drowning in noise. Reed raised a hand, said they appreciated her input. But this was a pilot's room. They'd make the calls from here. Sarah didn't argue. She didn't raise her voice. Her eyes went once more to the map, then down to her notes. She closed the folder and nodded, quietly, like she was apologizing for taking up space. She turned and walked out of the room. No one stopped her. No one called her back. Her footsteps faded down the hall, lost under the buzz of planning that was already moving on without her. Outside, the sky was hazy. The wind had started to pick up. From the edge of the tarmac, she could see the black smoke curling like a warning. She stood there for a while, watching, hands still, shoulders squared. The Warthogs sat ready, their engines silent. She had been one of them once. Now, she was invisible. But the numbers hadn't changed. The fire didn't care about rank, and in her gut she knew 4 wouldn't be enough. Not today. Not for what was coming. Part 4. The Awakening of Ghost. Part 4.1. Ghost didn't die there. Sarah's hand was on the door, her head low, the sting of humiliation still burning behind her eyes. The laughter from inside the operations room echoed faintly down the corridor. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, sharp and sudden. She almost ignored it. Then she saw the name. Rodriguez. The message was short. Don't let them win. David wouldn't want this. Her breath caught. A second message followed. I know who you are. 30 years maintaining fighters. I know a pilot when I see one. Ghost didn't die in the Korengal. Sarah froze. For the first time in 3 years, someone had said it out loud. She turned slowly, her boots heavy against the tile. The door to the briefing room loomed ahead, noise humming behind it. She opened it and stepped inside. This time, no one laughed. They turned confused. She didn't flinch. She didn't wait to be asked. She walked to the front, pulled out her phone, tapped a few keys. A photo filled the screen. An A-10 painted black, its skin scorched and worn. Standing beside it was a younger Sarah in full flight gear. The fuselage was marked with 47 small symbols, each one a life saved. She turned the screen to the room. Her voice didn't waver. That was Bird 7. She flew it in Afghanistan. 203 hours of combat flight. 521 lives saved. 1 lost. Her gaze moved across the faces, all now dead quiet. Colonel Reed opened his mouth, but nothing came out. Sarah continued. She named operations, coordinates, call signs. She listed medals, citations, flight patterns. She described a canyon run so tight it left burn marks on her wingtips. She showed them records no one in that room had ever seen. When she finished, she put the phone down. Her hands were steady, her voice even. The woman in front of them wasn't a supply clerk. She was the pilot they'd all heard about but never expected to meet. A legend buried beneath paperwork and silence. No one spoke. Not even Dawson. Not even Miller. The only sound in the room was the faint hum of the projector. It was as if the air had shifted, as if gravity itself had changed. She stood there still and solid as the truth settled in. Sarah Carter hadn't come back to ask for respect. She had come back to remind them who she was. Ghost. And Ghost was not done yet. Part 4.2. The room goes silent. Sarah stepped up to the whiteboard and picked up the marker without asking. She didn't look for approval. She just started drawing. A rough topographic sketch appeared, clean lines outlining the valley fire line and predicted burn zone. She drew arrows along the ridges, showing how the canyon wind would accelerate the flames. Then she circled a grid in the southeast quadrant. That's your weak spot. Wind will push hard through here, double speed, maybe more. If it breaches the line, the whole sector collapses in under 3 hours. She marked out 5 aircraft positions, 3 running north-south sweeps, 2 cutting east-west breaks. Her hand moved fast but steady, like she'd flown the map in her mind 100 times already. Someone cleared their throat. Dawson, maybe. He looked lost. She cut him off before he spoke. 4 aircraft can't hold that line. Not with the current fuel load elevation and heat distortion. You need 5 minimum or you'll be flying body bags home. Her voice never rose. It didn't need to. Miller tried to argue, said specs could be looked up online. She didn't blink. Asked him what happens when you pull 30 degrees bank in turbulent canyon air while carrying full ordnance. He said nothing. She explained it. In 3 sentences, with the tone of someone who had done it. The silence grew dense, not heavy with shame, but with recognition. Colonel Reed stepped forward, face tight. He asked who trained her. She looked him in the eye. No one. I trained others. The room shifted again. A murmur rose at the back. One voice. It said the name. Ghost. The word hung there. Not shouted, not dramatic, just spoken. And suddenly everything made sense. The skill, the certainty, the weight in her eyes. Sarah Carter was the myth that pilots whispered about on overseas deployments, the one who didn't break, the one who brought everyone else home. The door opened and Rodriguez walked in holding something in his arms, a flight suit, faded, creased, still marked with oil. Her helmet rested on top, name barely visible on the side. He handed it to her without a word. She took it, ran her hand across the patch. She turned back to the room. I'm not asking. I'm informing you. I'm flying. You can stay here and wait. Or you can gear up and follow. Either way, the fire's not waiting. She left the marker on the board and walked out. No salute. No pause. Only certainty. Part 5. Flying into Fire. Part 5.1. The Suit Returns. The hangar door groaned open as Sarah stepped inside the flight suit folded neatly in her arms. The place smelled the same as it always had, oil metal and jet fuel, but today it felt different. A dozen mechanics paused what they were doing when they saw her. Some of them straightened. A few just stared. She moved toward the locker room, boots echoing off the concrete. Behind her, Rodriguez walked slow, silent, like he was giving space to something sacred. In the corner, she opened the old wooden bench and laid out the suit. Her hands moved slowly. The fabric still remembered her. It gave in the places it used to. Fit exactly like it once had. Each strap, each buckle, each motion felt like memory, more than effort. She zipped it closed with quiet finality, pulled her hair back into a tighter knot and settled the helmet under her arm. It still had her name on it, barely faded. Ghost. Not a label. Not a myth. Just a truth she had tried to bury. When she stepped back out, the hangar had fallen silent. The crew stood still. Bird 7 waited at the far end, her twin engines cold but her skin gleaming. Sarah walked toward her like she was approaching an old friend. She reached out and touched the side panel with her fingertips. She didn't speak. She just stood there, her hand pressed to the metal, breathing steady. The aircraft had changed over the years, new paint here and there, a few upgraded systems. But the heart of it hadn't. Neither had hers. Rodriguez came up beside her. He didn't smile. Just nodded. Welcome back. Sarah nodded back, her eyes never leaving the jet. She climbed the ladder one rung at a time, each step weightless. Her boots touched the cockpit rim, and for the first time in years, she slid into the seat. Her hands found the harness clips without hesitation. Her left thumb checked the comm switch. Right hand moved to the throttle. Everything responded like it remembered her. She leaned back into the seat and let out a quiet breath. The sound of boots pounding against concrete broke the stillness. Colonel Reed burst into the hangar shouting her name. His voice bounced off the walls, sharp and breathless. Sarah didn't flinch, didn't turn. She locked in her helmet, flipped the main power switch, and waited for the roar. The turbine spun to life, slow at first, then rising. The hum became a growl. The growl became a scream. Bird 7 woke up under her hands. She belonged to no one else now. From the tarmac window, the fire was visible on the horizon, thick, fast, alive. But so was she, and this time she wasn't waiting for permission. She was already home. Part 5.2, Saving the 500. The sky above the ridge was black with smoke thick enough to swallow sunlight. Sarah pushed Bird 7 through the turbulence engines, groaning as the fire line came into view. Below her, flames snapped at the treetops, running fast and high through the canyon. The target zone was tight. She called out coordinates, her voice calm over the comms. They would run staggered sweeps, 3 north to south, 2 across. She was first in. The heat distortion warped the air, turning the valley into a moving maze. Her HUD flickered, then stabilized. She dropped low throttle steady speed at 150 knots. Her eyes stayed locked on the contour line she had memorized from the briefing board. She triggered the first drop. Fire retardant sprayed across the slope, bright red against the dark. 1 line down, 4 to go. Behind her, Captain Moore followed in the second Warthog. Sarah watched her angle tighten too fast. She called it out. Pull back, drop nose, trust the left bank. Moore adjusted in time and made her mark. On the next pass, Miller hit turbulence and dipped hard into a downdraft. Smoke swallowed his plane. Sarah broke formation and dove in behind him. The ash blurred everything. She squinted, called for elevation data. Found his shadow at the last second, his wing wobbling against the mountainside. She guided him out step by step like a hand on his shoulder. They both cleared the ridge together. On the third sortie, the east flank flared up. Sarah rerouted, instantly split her grid, and pulled fuel from her own run to buy them 10 extra seconds. That 10 seconds was everything. Fire crews broke through the brush line. She could see them now. Yellow helmets, blinking strobes, no clear exit. She called in the 4th plane, told them to hold fire until she cleared a new break. It would have to be precise. She dove hard, riding the line between wind and wall. The Warthog rocked, rattled, then leveled. The drop released exactly where she needed it. By the fifth run, her arms ached from the G-force. Her voice was rough, but her eyes were clear. She'd mapped every path. She called each plane by name, told them when to move, when to hold, when to trust the silence and just follow. By dusk, the smoke began to lift. The final group of firefighters crossed the safe zone, all accounted for. Every single one. Sarah circled once, checked the heat maps, and made a final sweep. Then she turned for home. Her cockpit was streaked with ash, her gloves soaked with sweat. But Bird 7 flew smooth, steady as she always had. And this time, no one was lost. The wheels of Bird 7 kissed the runway just after sunset. The tires screeched, then held steady as Sarah guided the aircraft down with practiced ease. Her hands stayed on the controls until she reached the far end of the tarmac. Then she slowed to a crawl. The smoke still clung to the fuselage, a thin coat of ash trailing down the wings. She shut the engines down one by one. As the canopy opened, the roar of the base returned. Mechanics gathered. Ground crews stood still. Pilots lined the path back to the hangar. Some saluted. Others just watched in silence. Sarah climbed down the ladder slowly, one rung at a time, her gloves black with soot. Colonel Reed stood waiting. His eyes were tired. His voice was quiet. He told her they owed her more than thanks. He admitted he was wrong, that he had let pride and assumptions get in the way. He offered her back everything: flight status, command, even her own squadron. Sarah listened. She didn't interrupt. When he finished, she nodded once, not unkind. But then she said the words that ended the conversation. Ghost died in Afghanistan. I just filled in for her today. Reed didn't push. He just stepped aside. Rodriguez met her near the hangar door, holding out a water bottle and a fresh towel. She took both, wiped the ash from her face. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Behind her, Bird 7 sat quiet, cooling down in the dimming light. The next morning, Sarah was back at her desk in logistics by 5:30. The monitor glowed pale blue. Her fingers moved across the keyboard like nothing had changed. 500 new requests had come in from the fire departments: gear, transport, fuel, clothing. She reviewed each one line by line. A photo frame sat beside her now. It held a picture of her and David standing shoulder to shoulder in front of their A-10, grinning under the Afghan sun. His arm was slung over her shoulder. Her eyes were squinting in the light. They looked weightless. No one spoke of the mission officially. There were no medals, no ceremony. But the pilots knew. Word spread fast. New recruits learned quickly. When someone new made a joke about the quiet woman in logistics, one of the older flyers would pull them aside. Be careful, they'd say. She's not what she seems. Sometimes Sarah heard them whisper. She didn't correct them. She didn't join the conversation. She just kept typing. Calm, steady, focused. At lunch, she still sat near the window, the corner table with the view of the runway. The chatter of the cafeteria buzzed around her, but she barely noticed. Her eyes followed the planes, counted them as they returned. Not just numbers, people, lives. That evening she walked home the long way, cutting through the edge of the airfield. The sky above was streaked with gold and smoke. Her boots brushed against dry gravel. She didn't carry regret with her now, just memory and peace. When she reached her apartment, she opened the drawer beside her bed. The letter was still there, still unfinished. She unfolded it gently, sat down and stared at the words. She didn't need to write more. She already knew what she'd say. Thank you for flying with me. I kept going, just like you would have. Then she folded it once more, slid it back and turned off the light. The night was quiet, and for the first time in years, she didn't feel like anything was missing. She had flown, she had returned, and she had let go.